former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who would occasionally go to the United Nations every year saying that the Holocaust was a lie. I mean, to understand G7 as a failed bloc would be somewhat equivalent to understanding the UN Security Council as a failed bloc. Israel took this reckless action, escalated things to an unprecedented level, and now is pounding the Iranian capital of 10 million people, literally just targeting civilian areas. If Iran took any hostile action against me or against the interests of the United States, I would target 52 cultural sites in Iran which were of significant importance to the Iranian history. The reports by Iran's Ministry of Health, which is not run by a militant group, it's actually the Ministry of Health of a UN member state, say that so far 224 people have been killed.
Massive escalation between Israel and Iran. Israel now is going into Tehran, which means into civilian spaces. No longer is it confined to military installations. This even as G7 leaders are meeting. What does it mean for the region? And how is the world looking at this escalation? To discuss all this and more, I'm being joined by a senior journalist, as also an Iran expert, an Iranian himself, Kourosh Ziabari. He is based out of New York. Kourosh, thank you so much for joining us here on the India Today network. Let's begin with the entire fact that there were crucial talks that were going to take place between Iran and the United States of America. And it's around that time that Israel carries out what it calls preemptive strikes to stop Iran from going nuclear.
Thanks for having me on the show. So basically, my perspective, which is pretty much not grounded in my perception of what's happening, but pretty much based on the principles of international law, is that this was simply an unprovoked act of aggression against Iran, and it defies the principal articles of the United Nations Charter, defining that the use of force without endorsement by the Security Council or without the presence of the necessary conditions for the use of force against another member of the United Nations is not permitted and is not acceptable. So this should give rise to concerns as to whether the United Nations as an international body is capable of overseeing and also enforcing its regulations and overseeing the conduct of its member states. So to actually give any kind of military operation a pretext of preemptiveness is something that would open the floodgate to lots of speculations and assumptions that we can probably never substantiate, because any country which might go to war against any other country, including a neighbor or non-neighbor, might justify that act as a preemptive strike based on some sort of speculation about what might happen or what if something happens. Any country in the region might have concerns about their neighboring countries or countries beyond the borders. So if the international order is degraded to the point that by invoking some concerns, these activities can be rationalized, I guess we are going to be in a much fragile state of international order. So basically, as you suggested, the latest, the next round of Iran-US negotiations to achieve a diplomatic solution to the Iran nuclear controversy was scheduled to happen in the capital of Oman on Sunday, basically. And to orchestrate these unprovoked attacks against Iran a couple of days ahead of those talks is pretty much inconsistent with what the US government has been saying about its commitment to diplomacy. It might be simply an act of sabotage on behalf of Israel to derail the diplomatic process. We are still not sure whether or not the US government and Israel have been on the same wavelength regarding this round of military escalation by Israel, and whether the Israeli Prime Minister just took the initiative on his behalf to simply derail the process, the same way he tried to sabotage the previous nuclear agreement between Iran
I was just going
and
to
the
ask
United
you that.
States.
The two very important aspects, Kourosh, that you talk about. One is, let's go back a little in history and explain as to what is it that Netanyahu has done in the past as well, and why are US-Iran talks, or a successful US-Iran talk, such a huge threat to Netanyahu's survival?
So basically in 2015, and after nearly 2 years of intense diplomacy, the former US President Barack Obama and the former Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who ran a campaign of moderation and constructive engagement with the international community, successfully achieved a deal that was codified into the Security Council Resolution 2231 that came to be known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. That basically was a significant diplomatic milestone and brought an end to years of tension and hostility in the region. It was actually going to serve as a launching pad for further engagement between Iran and the countries with which it used to be not necessarily on friendly terms, including its neighbors in the Persian Gulf, the European Union countries that used to have somewhat complicated ties with Iran, and the United States itself, which was somewhat opening up to trade directly with Iran, something that was unprecedented since 1979, when the Iranian Revolution literally upended the state of Iran-US relations. So at that time, the Israeli Prime Minister actually bypassed the White House, directly flew to Washington, D.C., and instead of going to the Oval Office to meet the US president, he went to the Congress and addressed a joint session of the US Congress to convince and persuade the US lawmakers to either stop Obama from proceeding with striking a nuclear agreement with Iran, or otherwise convince them that that was a disastrous agreement that was in the making. Other actors at that time were, doing their own share of trying to torpedo that diplomatic process. The reason it might be, or it might have been considered a roadblock to these countries' respective agendas, was that Iran was going to emerge in a region in which rivalries and competitions have been dominant over resources, over hegemony, over the upper hand diplomatically and otherwise. So after years of isolation and strangulation, Iran's economy would take off. And also something that was considered as the portrayal of Iran as a perennial threat was going to pretty much fade away. Iran would be considered a normal actor and partner instead of being painted as this menace that was looming over the region. So the securitization of the idea of Iran by virtue of that deal was, when it happened, was pretty much gone. And now it was almost going to be the same. And I guess there was less tolerance for that transformation.
Also, Kourosh, the second aspect that we were discussing, whether if America was indeed involved or not in the derailment of the process itself. Now, we can say that Netanyahu did what he did on his own, and there has been massive escalation. But Donald Trump, the US president, has been asking for a deal and asking Iran to strike a deal whilst they walked back on the conversation that they were having on enrichment, allowing enrichment, from allowing enrichment to saying zero enrichment. Allowing enrichment, but no nuclear bombs, was where the conversation was at. And just ahead of the Sunday talks, US walked back on that. No enrichment, zero enrichment. That is an unacceptable basis for talks for Iran anyway.
So basically, again, even though that condition was floated, to which Iran publicly objected, still there were these, I mean, these were the technicalities that could have been worked out in the negotiating room. Whenever the diplomats sat together and just had the chance and opportunity to exchange views. So even the expression of that precondition, which for the Islamic Republic was a non-starter, could have been resolved if they had the chance and if they were given the chance to continue the process. There are actually reports that, and I hope it's simply untrue, that I mean, the US negotiating team used these talks as a pretext to actually give the Israeli government the opportunity to finalize its idea of launching these massive military operations against Iran, technically initiating a war. But I don't pretty much buy into that narrative because since the day he came to office, US President said that he was committed to a diplomatic solution. He directly wrote to the Iranian Supreme Leader by appealing to him for a negotiated solution, even though he set a deadline of 60 days in his letter. The fact that these two arch nemesis, which were pretty much even incapable of talking to each other or standing the idea of communicating with each other, again came to this agreement that this could happen, given the track record of what the former Trump administration had done, which the Islamic Republic considered as massive violations of its red lines, including eliminating the major commander of the IRGC's Quds Force. These were actually the things that had, to a large extent, extinguished any possibility of Iran and the US, at least under the Trump administration, ever talking to each other again. So all of this were resolved, but to say that Trump didn't want to deal, certainly he did, which is why he assigned a delegation, a senior negotiator. But we are still trying to demystify what went wrong in the process, that Israel took this reckless action, escalated things to an unprecedented level, and now is pounding the Iranian capital of 10 million people, literally just targeting civilian areas.
We'll come to the civilian question because that's really important and an important aspect of our conversation when it comes to Israel. But before that, the fact that you just mentioned Trump did want to deal, and it does seem like he does, because his latest post did say that there are calls that are happening as we speak between the interlocutors to ensure that they come back to the talking table. But right now, with the military leadership decimated in Iran, what's your assessment on whether if Iran will come back to the negotiating table at all?
I mean, from a strategic perspective, Iran should actually come to the negotiating table because first, it understands that its military capabilities have been, to a large extent, eliminated, and also its senior leadership is divided, and with the assassination and killing of all of these major figures in the army and in the IRGC, the major masterminds of any military response to Israel's activities have already been removed from the scene. So there's pretty much no one who can innovate or at least provide advisory opinion to the Ayatollah in terms of what he should do in this very fraught moment. And also, I mean, from a survival perspective, if the Islamic Republic wants to ensure that it doesn't disintegrate and collapse as a political entity, it should be actually wisely considering the possibility of coming back to the negotiating table, strike a nuclear deal, and hopefully, from an international peace perspective, remove the specter of violence from the region. And I mean, personally, I would say that any recourse to weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons, is something that every conscientious Iranian citizen objects to and opposes to, and it's not even a popular option among the Iranian public. So what I'm considering is trying to reimagine what the leadership in Tehran is thinking. But at this moment, while they have rejected the continuation of attacks under the shadow of military escalation and threats, I mean, it might give them the external image of defiance and at least project the public idea of Iran still standing its ground and rejecting coercive diplomacy, something that I guess they will continue to stick to as a position, maybe until a point when it's overdue or when it's late to be reversed. But I hope that under mounting pressure, if, for example, you get external actors added to the conversation as mediators, including Saudi Arabia or Russia, which are equally on very friendly terms with the Trump administration, it might be the case that these two actors, given their already friendly ties with Tehran, can play a role in making a difference.
That's a very important point you make, the fact that we have G7 meeting happening on one end, and it's not the G7 countries that are going to influence any forward movement in peace and de-escalation, but it's Russia that could influence de-escalation between Israel and Iran. Having said that, coming back to Netanyahu and Trump, Kourosh, what is it that you think is the relationship right now? Because it does seem like Trump tried to rein in Netanyahu, couldn't. On the other hand, Netanyahu tried to persuade Trump, couldn't.
I mean, I'm trying to make sense of the nature of relationship between Trump and Netanyahu because the current Israeli prime minister doesn't seem to be taking really instructions from anyone. That's also partly because his partners and allies also in the European Union have afforded him this idea of continuous impunity because as someone who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for the commission of war crimes, at least the ideal outcome would be for the major European leaders to come out and say, well, we have created this global order. We expect everyone to play by the rules. We expect mostly the global south and the third world countries, especially the Middle East, to comply with what we have set up as this configuration, which is okay. It's very good to play by the rules, but we want the rules to apply to everyone equally. We don't want to create a hypocritical world order in which a certain group of countries are constantly held to a set of standards while a certain group of countries are exempt. And this certainly will have long-term implications for global peace and security, and necessarily from a global security perspective, because if you continue to degrade and negate the same orders and principles that you have enshrined in international conventions, treaties, if each of them start to unravel, it will be much difficult to simply contain spirals like this, to in a very simple term, to control the world, because you have sometimes leaders who are ambitious over territory, over ideology, over politics. So there should be a point at which sane, wise, reasonable leaders come out and say, well, enough is enough. We have to enforce the rules. But in terms of the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu, I believe that Trump at this point appears to be okay with what the Israeli prime minister is doing, because he previously indicated that he didn't want to see further bloodshed and violence. Now he's saying that it might be the case that the US may get involved or not. So there's still this ambiguity that surrounds the situation, which also pretty much depends on which advisor is actually talking to President Trump and sharing opinions with him. I mean, the pretty much promising point is that he has removed many of the anti-Iran hawks from his diplomatic squad, but there are still voices that are pretty much interested in confrontation and violence.
Coming to the civilian question now, after the Israeli attacks, Iran retaliated, and Israelis said that Iran is attacking their civilians, while Israel did not target civilians. What do you make of this argument at a time when Tehran is being evacuated not by embassies, Indian embassies evacuating Indians, Iranians themselves are on panic mode? What are you hearing from the ground? And what do you make of the statements made by Israel?
So first, of course, the reports that civilians in Israel have been killed have been confirmed, and this certainly needs to be denounced and condemned. No civilian casualty, no civilian loss of life is acceptable. Every single person in the world needs to be protected, and their dignity and honor has to be respected as human beings. But what's happening with the people of Iran is that, again, we have to go back to the question of an unprovoked military aggression. And the idea that the aggressor here is, again, using a rhetoric that is simply even not consistent with the international humanitarian law, which is the law of the war. So the Israeli defense minister, Israel cuts, saying that Tehran will be burning, or the residents of Tehran will pay a price. Again, these are warnings that people in Iran and also elsewhere in the world are paying attention to, which casts into doubt the sincerity of assertions that Israel, for example, is not at odds with the people of Iran, is not an enemy of the people of Iran, or is not seeking an adventure in Iran. Also, in terms of the speculations or assertions that Israel is not targeting civilians in Iran, I mean, at least you can just simply survey the media reports that have already been confirmed. The reports by Iran's Ministry of Health, which is not run by a militant group, it's actually the Ministry of Health of a UN member state, saying that so far 224 people have been killed. In the city of Tabriz, which is not even the capital of Iran, 18 people have been killed. Many of these attacks have disproportionately impinged on and affected areas which host a large population of Iranian minorities, including Iranian Kurds or Azeris. A 24-year-old poet has been killed. A teenager gymnast has just been killed earlier today. And then when a painter, a female painter, has been killed. So these are the reports that are emerging. Their family members, their friends are speaking out. And to ignore all of this at the same time claiming that the government that is actually involved in this kind of activity, targeting and killing civilians, cares about the people of Iran, Iranian women, and promises them liberation, democracy. I believe that this is simply dishonest. If I don't want to use other terms, I would say this is dishonest because at the same time as floating the idea of support and the sympathy with and friendship with the people of Iran, we cannot bomb them, we cannot starve them into liberation, we cannot, I mean, the water supply system in the capital of Iran with nearly 10 million residents has been disrupted. There have been floods in densely populated and at the same time famous districts of Tehran. Many of these districts that are being targeted host palaces, historical sites. So we are getting to a point at which the cultural heritage and legacy of an ancient civilization is at stake. Are we paying attention to these or not? I mean, back in 2020, the President of the United States, again, Donald Trump, in his first term, had actually made a statement after some escalations in the region and after the killing of Iranian commander Soleimani, that if Iran took any hostile action against me or against the interests of the United States, I would target 52 cultural sites in Iran, which were of significant importance to the Iranian history. So would something like that even be invoked again? Are we going to hear that sort of rhetoric from the Israeli authorities or from, again, their supporters? We're not sure.
Well, very interesting. You have family in Iran, Kourosh. You have people you know in Iran. Is there panic? What's the situation on the ground?
Um, the latest update I've received is that, I mean, personally, many of the extended family members of um, my mom, who lives in northern Iran, are actually coming from the capital, Tehran, to stay with her in the province of Gilan, which is a bordering state of the province of the Caspian Sea. So basically, this is not what should have been happening, given that, again, the stated objective of this military operation was to purportedly target the nuclear infrastructure or military sites. But why are so many people, thousands of people, fleeing the capital of Iran? I've seen footage of the roads that lead to the cities um, of the north, including the province of Mazandaran or the province of Gilan. They are just literally flooded with cars, overwhelmed. All of this will also at some point create a humanitarian crisis, because these provinces are the ones that are not financially and economically as prosperous as Tehran. They will face a burden of incoming uh, literally domestically displaced migrant or internally displaced migrants who will be staying there for extended periods. There will be water, electricity shortages. There will be other issues. And then at the same time, I guess you referenced earlier in your opening remarks, foreign embassies, especially European embassies, are being closed down. So again, the countries which ideally should have been supportive of the people of Iran in this critical moment are technically
Leaving.
withdrawing their consular support. So many students, artists, journalists, others who could at least afford to leave the country are being stranded. So the idea of support for Iran or to standing by the people of Iran and their democratic aspirations continues to be proven to be not as realistic and sincere as it's often claimed.
Kourosh, you just mentioned nuclear, so I have to ask you this. Somebody who's been looking at the region very closely for very many years. Um, the fact that Iran's nuclear enrichment and Iran's nuclear program has always been under the watchful eyes of the international community, but nothing much is said about reports of covert nuclear weapons that Israel possesses. Uh, in comparison, if you see, what's the threat perception for Iran when it comes to Israel and the reports of covert nuclear weapons that Israel possesses?
Of course, I mean, to start from the second part of your question, this is certainly one of the many wrongdoings and failures and miscalculations of the Iranian government, which over the years has been espousing and reproducing a narrative of denial and uh, to a large extent, extermination against another state, at least in rhetoric. I guess we are at a point uh, when we can see that some of those people who have been ferociously repeating those talking points, including former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who would occasionally go to the United Nations every year saying that um, the Holocaust was a lie, or other exaggerated statements along the lines of Israel should be removed from the map, or other statements of those nature. They are engaged in an introspection. First, I guess, concluding the folly and baselessness of what they said back then. First, from a historical perspective, over the years, they concluded that they were simply deluded and they were misguided. And also they are realizing the national security costs of what they were saying. They were, I guess, to a large extent consumed by their revolutionary zeal. And now they're seeing that, well, what they have been saying over the years, all of these shenanigans to a large extent are coming to haunt them at home. So to expect Iran to develop nuclear energy program that might lead to the development of nuclear weapons and not use it against an existential adversary is something that I guess Israel or the United States or other countries would probably find inconceivable. They believe that if Iran at some point achieves a nuclear weapon, it certainly is going to deploy it, given the nature of the rhetoric its authorities have been using. So I guess that's a credible fear, and that gives some reason to the international community to try to address that question. But it's not, again, an authority that has been given to any government or any country to take unilateral action militarily to put an end to that nuclear waste, something that has been unnecessary, counterproductive, costly, imposing billions of dollars of damage on the people of Iran in the form of sanctions and in the form of misguided investment in this nuclear enterprise, building power plants that haven't ever been used for civilian purposes. That's something. But why is Israel's nuclear program not scrutinized and investigated? That's also something that I guess people can look at, the global leaders can take a look at. The Federation of American Scientists has confirmed that Israel actually retains up to 90 nuclear warheads. So why is that not part of the calculus? Why is that not a concern for those who should be concerned? Why is the International Atomic Energy Agency never looking into that? I mean, the status quo, part of the diplomatic political realities of the world we're living in. I guess that's a broader question that needs to be answered.
Just a couple of more questions before I let you go, Kourosh. The fact that there were reports from both sides of political assassinations being planned, and that even the supreme leader of Iran is now not out of bounds for Israel. And then reports coming in that the US president has very clearly said that there can be no political assassinations. Is this a window for Iran to look at the United States of America yet again?
I mean, the idea that there could have been a potential plan for Israel to try to target Iran's supreme leader or other political authorities, I mean, that could have been a major escalation that could have violated several international treaties, including the Vienna Convention, the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian law, and the principle of distinction, all of that. But for President Trump to try to intervene and stop a potential plan like that, I guess that's a good sign if it continues to remain the plan, because regardless of whoever Ali Khamenei is, which I guess many Iranians would consider an undemocratic, tyrannical leader who has been suppressing the people of Iran through his leadership and through his agenda of cultural strangulation, which I should confirm and acknowledge has been responsible for massive suffering over these 40 years or 46 years. Still, for any government to try to remove a dictator on its own because it believes that it behooves its interest, it's out of question. It's not the way the international community works. I guess that's a good sign, but I'm not sure if the Iranian government would perceive that as an indication of goodwill on behalf of the United States to rush to the negotiating table. What can probably change the calculus of the Iranian government is maybe to be persuaded by its partners, including Russia or maybe some Persian Gulf Arab countries, that there is an interest, a longer term security assurance for Iran as well, that there needs to be a negotiated solution to this. Or if they perceive or feel that this is getting out of hand.
You mentioned Russia again, so I have to ask you this, Kourosh. Is G7 a failed bloc? The fact that there have been two major conflicts, a war, Russia-Ukraine, the Gaza war, and now we're looking at Israel-Iran conflict as well. And in all this, the G7 completely failed. Is it time to look at the other blocs that influence these countries more than the G7, such as the Russia, India, China, particularly Russia and China? Are those the countries that have become bigger influencers, and is G7 failing?
I mean, to understand G7 as a failed bloc would be somewhat equivalent to understanding the UN Security Council as a failed bloc. Whether or not it's a failure is a very subjective question. What I would say is that depending on the interests that are going to be served and depending on the context in which the bloc functions in relation to each specific question, it can even be a very successful bloc, but I mean, it can also choose to be failing. So what is happening right now, including in the question of Ukraine, where the Security Council has simply failed to prevent the escalation and the suffering of the Ukrainian citizens, or similarly in the case of the Gaza Strip and the war that has been going on for the past 7 months, leading to a humanitarian catastrophe. Again, all of these coalitions have been, I guess, willingly simply undecided or reluctant to take action.
Are they a divided house, Kourosh? Are they so divided today that nobody's listening to them?
And also, I mean, because again, this is how power politics and power equations work. I mean, at the Security Council, there are two extreme sides of the spectrum. One side decides that in breach of the Charter of the United Nations, it wants to initiate a military escalation, a military campaign. The other side wants to end and neutralize that war. It cannot, because they have the same sort of powers technically in that sitting room or in that conference room. Elsewhere, they can meet, but they don't have the legal power to actually carry out their objectives or to accomplish their goals. So I guess these divisions are explaining the nature of global politics and the board that we are inhabiting at this time.
And do you see Russia, China as a more influential alternative to the G7 bloc? Is that something that you're seeing happen right now?
I mean, the competition is emerging. Russia and China are trying to exert their influence. The US, of course, as the leading economic power, is also trying to exert its influence in different ways: tariffs, sanctions, travel bans. All of these are tools within the statecraft toolbox that can be wielded. Each country is trying to gain the upper hand. And ultimately, what is not being served are the interests of those who are supposed to be served, which is the people, the population, it's the civilians. I mean, as a result of all of these confrontations and struggles over power and dominance, they are ultimately the aspirations and hopes and lives of people that are either being targeted or sacrificed or undermined. So even if, I mean, Russia or China emerge as alternatives to the Western-led order, which is pretty much spearheaded by the United States and its European allies, less so right now. I guess what is not happening is our universe moving in a better direction. The rise of the far right, immigration crackdowns, political suppression everywhere, and the shrinking of the space for speech. These are global trends, and these are the questions that are not being addressed.
Right. Final question to you, Kourosh. Do you think a longer military conflict between Israel and Iran is sustainable for either side?
Unfortunately, what I'm seeing right now is the prospect of an extended military confrontation, and the fact that the two countries are divided, I mean, separated by several other countries in between, means that the prospects and well-being of those countries are going to be affected as well. I mean, people of Iraq, Jordan, other countries that are located between these two rivals, exactly, they are also going to be directly or indirectly affected whenever there are missiles or drones flying over their skies. This is not sustainable. And I guess if there are still wise and prudent leaders existing in the world, ruling countries that are powerful, they should just take action to bring an end to this cycle of unwarranted hostility.
Kourosh Ziabari, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Thank you.
Thanks very much.